Welcome everyone back to another topic of Texas government. Today we are going to be talking about the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy, what is the bureaucracy? Well, the bureaucracy is the system that consists of non-elected officials. That means these are people that are hired in order to administer government policies and programs. So, why do we need the bureaucracy? Why do we need these people to administer these policy programs? Well, there are over 220 entities which create the Texas bureaucracy. Let me repeat that. There are over 220 entities. That means over 220 separate departments or agencies which create the Texas bureaucracy. Now, all of these agencies and departments together, their goal is to place these policies into enforcement to make sure they are prepared for the use of the population. Now, in order to achieve their goals, the bureaucracy, all these agencies, not only do they have to work independently, but they are basically in competition with one another. So these agencies and departments compete with each other in order to enforce policies. So who is the head of the bureaucracy? Well, there is no one single person in the Texas government who bears the ultimate responsibility for the actions of the state bureaucracy. There are, however, policymakers. Now, do not confuse bureaucracy with policymakers. Policymakers decide what is going to be done. Bureaucracy actually implements the decisions in what is hopefully the best way possible. So, policymakers make the policies. They are the ones creating the work. The bureaucracy is actually implementing the policies. They are the ones that are hopefully going to do their best job possible in order to make the bureaucracy work more efficiently. Now, policymakers. How do we get a bureaucracy? First of all, we need policymakers. So how do we get policymakers? Well, policymakers can be elected. Examples of elected policymakers are the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the lawyer for all officials, boards, and agencies in state government. Now, the Attorney General's office, the department, can and probably employs more than 4,000 people across the state. Now, their duties include assisting in child support enforcement, antitrust actions, Medicare fraud investigations, crime victim compensation, consumer protection, and various other activities. Now, the Attorney General is important for two reasons. The first one is because the Attorney General's office can issue opinions. These opinions are interpretations of the Constitution, statutory laws, or administrative laws. Second, the Attorney General represents the state and its government in both civil and criminal litigation. Now, the next policymaker is the Comptroller of Public Accounts. Now, this is the official that is in charge of money for the state. The comptroller's main job is to be the chief tax collector and chief pre-audit accounting officer for Texas. They are responsible for certifying the state's approximate biennial revenue. So every 2 years, the Comptroller of Public Accounts is responsible for making sure that we have basically our budget, that we have the money we will need to keep this place running, this place being the state, for the next 2 years. our next policymaker is the Commissioner of the General Land Office. Now, the General Land Office is responsible for managing and collecting rentals and leases for state-owned lands, awarding leases for exploration and production on state lands, and leasing mineral rights in the state's riverbeds and tidelands. So, also be aware that the Commissioner of the General Land Office, this position is the oldest continuously elected position in Texas history. So the Commissioner of the General Land Office, who is one of the Bush grandsons right now, is responsible for collecting rents and leases for all state-owned lands. Now, the next policymaker is the Commissioner of Agriculture. This is the person who heads the Department of Agriculture at the state level. The department is responsible for the administration of all laws as well as research, education, and regulatory activities relating to agriculture. Some of the items that they regulate are agriculture in general, egg quality, fuel quality, pesticides, seed quality, and weights and measures. This is the one that I was telling you. If you go to the grocery store or when you go pump gas, anything that is being measured on a per dollar basis is going to have a stamp from the Commissioner of Agriculture, because all of these weights and measures have to be calibrated to make sure that the consumer is actually getting what they pay for. Now, the Lieutenant Governor is an ex officio chair policymaker. This means basically he is a policymaker by default due to the fact that he is the president of the Senate. So he holds these default positions such as the chair of the Legislative Budget Board, the Legislative Council, and the Legislative Audit Board due to the fact that this person is the Lieutenant Governor. We'll continue on with policymakers. Now be aware that some policymakers can be appointed. One such policymaker is the Secretary of State. Now the Secretary of State is appointed by the governor, I should say nominated and appointed by the governor, but that appointment is dependent on the approval and consent of the Texas Senate. Now the Secretary of State's main job is to serve as Chief Election Officer for Texas. This means that his or her responsibilities cover administering election laws, maintaining voter registration records, and receiving election results. This person is also responsible for keeping official business and commercial records on file with the state. Now, the next person who is a policymaker is the Adjutant General. Now, the Adjutant General is an appointed position, of course, with the advice and consent of the Senate. Now, the Adjutant General is the state's top-ranking military official. They also have administrative jurisdiction of the Texas National Guard and the Texas State Guard. The current Adjutant General is Major General Tracy Norris. Now, the next policymaker is actually the Health and Human Services Commission. They are also appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate. Now, this commissioner heads the Consolidated Texas Health and Human Services System. Now, Texas Health and Human Services is actually a super agency. This super agency manages two major health and welfare departments. Now, the first one is actually the Texas Health and Human Services Commission, and the second department is the Texas Department of State Health Services. So, one agency manages two departments, and it is administered by one commissioner. And of course, here is a link to the Health and Human Services Department. If you have the copy of the PowerPoint on Canvas, feel free to click through and you can take a look at what the Health and Human Services Department responsibilities are. Now, next on our list is the Insurance Commissioner. In the state of Texas, the Insurance Commissioner is also appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. Now, this commissioner, their responsibility is to oversee the department, and their job is regulating the Texas insurance industry. If insurance companies want to raise rates in the state of Texas, they have to get permission from the Texas Insurance Commissioner. The Texas Department of Insurance is the department in charge of such things. Also, if you have complaints against insurance companies, you can make yourself known via the Department of Insurance. Now, as you can see, we are continuing with policymakers because policymakers who are a part of the bureaucracy include more than those that are elected and those that are appointed. There are those that are in positions such as the lieutenant governor or the attorney general, and then there are those that head departments such as the insurance commissioner and the health and human services commissioner. There are also those that are responsible for boards and commissions. So the first one on this list is the Texas Railroad Commission. Now, the Texas Railroad Commission regulates gas utilities, oil and gas pipelines, oil and gas drilling and pumping, and they used to be responsible for intrastate railroad transportation, hence the Texas Railroad Commission. Intrastate railroad transportation is transportation via rail within the state of Texas. However, that part of the commission has now been broken off into its own agency. Now, the Railroad Commission was established in 1891, and it is the state's oldest regulatory agency. It is the state's oldest regulatory agency, having been established in 1891. So next we're going to talk about the Sunset Advisory Commission. Now, the Sunset Advisory Commission responsibility is to review other agencies and departments. So in 2019, the agency reviewed 32 entities for the 86th legislative session. Now, out of the 32 entities that it reviewed, this resulted in 496 recommendations to streamline government while enhancing services to us, the citizens. Notable improvements include abolishing and transferring or consolidating 6 agencies, eliminating many unnecessary regulations, and strengthening agencies' accountability and effective delivery of services. Now, the Sunset Agency does release a report of their recommendations and the agencies that they have investigated. So if you are interested, you are able to go to Sunset Advisory's website and you will see what they have been up to in the previous year. Next, the Texas Education Agency. This agency, it is their responsibility to oversee and regulate the Texas public school system. They also administer national and state education law and State Board of Education rules and regulations. Now, the TEA has many divisions, um, with the following being some of those divisions. There is a division for accountability research, accreditation, adult and community education, charter school administration, curriculum, dropout prevention, and of course there are many others. Now, TEA is the one that is most familiar to most people because, of course, you being students, if you were students within the Texas school system, you would have heard about this, as any laws that they are presenting would have affected you. Or if you are now parents, laws that TEA administers either from the state or from the federal government are now going to affect you and your students. Now, the next thing that we have that is considered policymakers is ex officio boards. Now, these are boards who have members or leaders that are there strictly because they hold a position elsewhere in government. They are not elected, they are not nominated, they are a member of ex officio boards strictly because of the position that they already hold, such as the lieutenant governor. Now, is this a good or a bad thing? Um, Individuals such as the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the house, the comptroller, these members, these elected officials are on these ex officio boards strictly because of the position that they already hold. Now, such a group, such a board, one of which is the Texas Bond Review, the members are those people that I just mentioned, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker, and the comptroller. Now, the purpose of the board is to approve all bonds and other long-term debt of the state agencies and universities. So, how would you know that the people that are on this board actually have expertise in this area? Well, you wouldn't. And that's part of the problem, right? Being an ex officio board means the population does not get a voice in who sits on these boards, on boards such as the Texas Bond Review. They are instead populated by the politicians, by elected officials, strictly because of the position they hold. So this gives no consideration to whether or not they have expertise in the subject of debt or bonds, good or bad. It's up to each of us to decide, right? Are we willing to let these types of boards exist and let them be populated by members of an electorate strictly because of their positions, whether or not they have any education or any experience in the subject matter that they are responsible for? Lastly, of course, are appointed boards. As the name suggests, these are boards where all of its members, including its leadership, are appointed by other government officials, whether that be the legislature or the governor. These would be like those blue ribbon commissions, arts and fine arts boards, non-governmental entities, that kind of thing. But they all, in their own way, are considered policymakers because they have a voice in the types of policies that are created. Moving forward, we're going to talk about how you can go about recognizing a bureaucracy. Well, first and foremost, the size of the bureaucracy. Most bureaucracies are large in nature. They have to be just by design. There are so many issues that a bureaucracy has to oversee that they need many, many people to specialize in so many different areas. So there is no minimum or maximum size to a bureaucracy. Just know that as the population grows, so will the need for bureaucracy. Neutrality. Now, neutrality can mean two things. The first is how the law or regulation is administered. Is it administered fairly to everybody? The second one is in recognizing neutrality is how does an organization decide who it is going to employ? Do you have to know somebody before you can get employed? Or do you have to do a favor for somebody in order to get hired? Now, the federal government actually tried to reform bureaucracy after 1829 when Andrew Jackson became president. We went from a spoils system to a civil service merit. Civil service, in parens, a merit system. This means that we are a civil service merit system now, even at the state level. In this type of system, potential employees are tested, either written or oral, but these tests are used as a measure to begin a hiring process. They are testing you, the civil servant's entrance exam. They're testing to see if you would even be a candidate for a position. Nowadays, it is more about what you know than who you know. Before 1829, we were working on a spoils system. So if you helped somebody get into office, then you were guaranteed a position in the bureaucracy. Now, be aware that bureaucracy is actually a very hierarchical system. So there is a hierarchy as to management. There is formal authority and control exercised at every successive level, from the top to the bottom. So you will start with your department head and work your way down to your district managers, your regional managers, or vice versa. And then you will have department managers, you will have section managers. So you are having all of these individual people between you who would be at the bottom and the very top, which is the department commissioner or executive. So there is a rank that you have to follow. It's kind of like the military, right? If you are just the lowly little private at the bottom, then you have to file a chain of command before you get to the very top. What's the same way in a bureaucracy? If you're the one who is the data entry person at the bottom of the list, then there are people above you that you would have to go through in a successive manner before you would ever reach the department executive. Now, expertise. In the civil service merit system that we are working on now, you as an individual, if you would like to become a part of the bureaucracy, you have to have an understanding of not just your job, but how the decisions that you will be making will affect others. So you have to be an expert in your field. If you are going to work in the Health and Human Services Department, then you have to have some sort of Health and Human Services background, whether that be social work, nursing, administrating. There has to be some sort of educational expertise behind it. Now, when it comes to bureaucracy, there is always a question of whether privatizing the job that bureaucracy provides, whether there is a reason to consider privatizing bureaucracy. Would it be a good idea? Now, there are people that would argue that by privatizing bureaucracy, you would help alleviate the red tape that bureaucracy brings about, because private companies have profit motives. And by having these profit motives, private companies have a reason to want to make the work more efficient. However, those same profit motives can actually work against privatizing, because that means bureaucracy would become more efficient, But in becoming more efficient, can you guarantee that private companies are not going to cut corners? So it is one of those decisions and one of those arguments that you can argue either way. It would be good for us to discuss it when we meet them face to face again. Uh, but just stop and think about it when you talk about the bureaucracy, or if you find yourself in the bureaucracy. Would privatizing help your department? And if so, how? Or if you don't think so, why not? What are some of the things that would be cut or that would become a casualty of privatizing? Now, there is a joint effort that happens between bureaucracy and public policy. I need you to understand before we go any further that bureaucracy is trying to implement what agencies want to accomplish. And in doing so, in trying to implement what agencies want to accomplish, we have to consider that there are other people involved. There are clientele interest groups. Now, clientele interest groups, these are the groups that are going to be most concerned with the laws and policies being administered by a government agency. So these agencies want powerful and influential client groups so they can at least retain and hopefully grow in power. So there has to be a question that is asked. Can the legislature and their presiding officers help bureaucratic power? The answer is yes. Now, this can happen in numerous ways. The first one is the legislature and the presiding officers have legislative oversight of agencies. In other words, the legislature can call a certain department or a certain agency and ask how they are administering their policies, how they are using their appropriations in order to make sure that the department or the agency is acting within the best interest and within the goals of their agency. Secondly, the agencies are dependent on legislatures for laws that will expand their power, increase the scope of their duties, and protect these agencies and departments from unfriendly interests. Also, they are also dependent on the legislature for the appropriate funds for their operations. Without legislative support, a lot of these departments are done away with when they come around for sunset review. So you have to have influential clientele interest groups in order to survive. So the answer to can the legislature and their presiding officers help bureaucratic power? Yes, I just finished going over that. Keep in mind that the bureaucracy, each and every single one of these more than 220 agencies are looking to the legislature for support. If they lose the support of the legislature, then chances are good that these agencies or departments are going to be done away with, or they will be brought into another agency or department. So if you have the support, then you can thrive as your own individual agency and department, and you can grow. Another person that you can ask for or that you have to consider when we talk about the bureaucracy is the governor. You have to remember that while Texas has a plural executive, meaning that the governor shares his or her powers with other elected officials, the governor still has some power over the agencies. Now, the governor can influence the legislature with regards to appropriations or can strike funds from the power from a law with the power of the line item veto. This is how the governor can interact with the bureaucracy. Now, the governor also has power over the bureaucracy due to his appointive powers. This means that the governor can influence the bureaucracy via his appointments to those non-elected boards, commissions, um, and departments where he is responsible for nominating and appointing the department heads, such as the Secretary of State. So as we continue, we have to ask our question, what does a bureaucracy need? Well, first and foremost, a bureaucracy needs public support. What happens if the public thinks a bureaucracy is not doing a good job? Well, if you, the public, do not think a certain department is doing a good job, then you're going to complain. You are going to make your voice heard. You are going to register complaints with the appropriate authorities. If this department or agency is headed by an elected official, you will speak up against them. That person may not be reelected, or if they are appointed, then you can bring your complaints up to the legislature. I keep telling y'all, y'all can speak directly to your legislative representatives. Email, text, Twitter, everybody has social media now, so use what is available to you, right? So if an agency or a department does not have public support, then the option is there that the legislature will drop their support of that agency. Expertise is also required. Why does a bureaucracy need expertise? Well, the bureaucracy is going to be the people who take an idea from conception, promote it to all, and then they're in charge of enacting a policy. So you want somebody that is doing this work to be responsible, to be knowledgeable, to have the academic and practical knowledge that goes along with health and human services, with national security, with state security, with emergency response. Stop and think of the things that go on in our state. You need people that are knowledgeable, that are educated, that know how to do the job that they have taken on. And also, we need to have the ability to gather information. These agencies and departments need to be able to gather information to determine what laws are needed or wanted. That way, they can pass the information on to legislators or other elected or appointed officials and therefore get the ball rolling to get these new policies into a bill or to propose new legislature. If you do not tell a legislator what you need, how will you have the work to do for your agency? So now we'll talk about administration of the law. When legislators write laws, we have to stop and consider whether the laws that legislators write are clear and concise from the moment they are written, or are there issues with laws that we need to work through? Most of the time, when laws are first written, they are jumbled, there are issues, there are things that we did not consider in the initial writing that we now have been made aware of. So legislators have a general idea of what the law is supposed to do when they first write it, but it is not their job to know how to implement it. So we need to have somebody that can implement the law once it is written. All laws will go through administrative review. During administrative review, bureaucrats, the people in a department that are responsible for looking at these laws, at these brand new laws, these administrators will study and interpret the law so they can then write the rules and regulations to implement the law's enforcement. So all new laws will undergo administrative review. Administrative review, let me reiterate, is just the process of studying and interpreting the laws so that these bureaucrats, these administrators, can then write the rules and regulations that will lead to the implementation of the law's enforcement. Now, administrative law. Administrative law is simply the rules and regulations that were written during administrative review. Administrative review is the process of studying and interpreting and writing the rules and regulations. Administrative law is the rules and regulations that were written. So the effectiveness of a law is often determined by how administrative law is written. How are those rules and regulations that will govern the implementation of a new law written? Please do not get administrative review and administrative law confused. Administrative review is the function, it is the doing, it is the studying and interpreting of the laws. Administrative law are the rules and regulations that come out of the review that was made. As always, if you have any questions about anything that I have spoken about, please shoot me an email and I will be more than happy to explain it further. But please do not get these confused. One is the process of, the other, administrative law, is the actual rules and regulations written during the process of review. Of course, as with anything in government, there has to be accountability. Now, elective accountability. This is the obligation of elected officials to be directly answerable to the voters for their actions. However, a problem with this is that most people do not know which elected official is responsible for the bureaucracy. So here's my question to you. Is there one specific person responsible for the bureaucracy? The answer is no. There is not one specific purpose or person. Remember, the bureaucracy is made up of many agencies and departments. Each agency or department has one person responsible for it. That is the one person responsible for that one specific agency or department. So with elective accountability, there would be no one person held accountable for the entirety of the bureaucracy. We are having to hold each individual elected bureaucrat responsible individually. Now, legislative accountability. With legislative accountability, the legislature itself attempts to have some accountability of bureaucracy, and they do this by establishing auditing, budgeting, and oversight boards. Now, remember, I discussed earlier one of these boards, that being the Sunset Advisory Commission. It is their job, the Sunset Advisory Commission, to act as the legislature's oversight. It is the Sunset Advisory's responsibility to review all of these agencies and departments for efficiency. So the legislature has accountability over the bureaucracy through the Sunset Advisory. Now, accountability to the chief executive. This doesn't work very well in the state of Texas because in order to have accountability to the chief executive, we would need Texas to have a cabinet system where the chief executive appoints and removes top level administrators. This would then give the chief executive more control over the administration. However, remember that in Texas we have a plural executive, meaning the governor is sharing his power. So this is not possible. Just know that it is one of the ways in which to have accountability in a bureaucracy. It is just not possible within our state. Now, bureaucratic accountability. In all reality, the administrator is really accountable to the interest groups that ultimately benefit from the service programs an administrator provides. So the interest groups, these clientele groups, they are the ones that are looking for this bureaucratic accountability. So the administrators make laws favorable to their clientele group, then often find work in these groups after they leave public office. At the beginning of the semester, I mentioned that when you become an elected official or an official within government, most people will use it as a stepping stone or a stepping block to something bigger and better, whether that be a higher elected office, or if you return to the private sector, you then go into the industry in which you were an elected official. So consider this. The executive director of the Health and Human Services Department super agency in the state of Texas, when they leave office, what are the chances that they will then become the president of a major hospital or a major healthcare system in the private sector? This is what we are talking about when we consider bureaucratic accountability. In the end, the bureaucrat is accountable to those special interests that will then help him because he is responsible or she is responsible for the policy that affects their interest group. Now, last but not least, administrators and the public. Should we make administrators accountable to the public? Why would we want to do that? So consider that when you go back and review this slide and you consider the whole idea behind bureaucracy is, should we make our administrators accountable to the public? And how do we do that? Well, first we have open meeting laws. There are a few exceptions to the open meeting laws, and these are meetings regarding personnel, land acquisitions, or litigation matters. Other than those three specific issues, open meeting laws require all meetings of governmental bodies that make decisions concerning the public interest to be open to public scrutiny. This means that any governmental agency or body that holds a meeting has to make it an open meeting so that you, the public, can attend and you can be aware of what is happening in government. So unless a meeting is concerning personnel matters, land acquisition, or a litigation matter, every other meeting is open to the public. There are also open records laws. Now, open record laws are laws that require most records that are kept by the government to be open for the examination of the parties involved. So this is when you will see that the press will make numerous open records requests when they are investigating a governmental agency. By the same regard, even though we, the public, are not journalists, we also can request information from the federal government, the state government, any of the state agencies. Due to open records laws, we can submit a request for information, and so long as that information does not concern personnel, land acquisitions, or litigation matters, you should be able to receive a response from the agency that you are requesting these records from. Of course, there are always whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are those government employees who expose corruption, incompetence, and criminal acts by other government employees or agencies. Texas has a whistleblower law, which in theory is there to protect the employees who report law violations. But hopefully you will remember what I have said about theory. It is great on paper. It does not always work when out in the real world. So we have to be considerate of the whistleblower laws, and that even though they are there for the protection of government employees who are trying to expose corruption and mismanagement, it is not always a very protective law. This can happen in private sector also. We've seen it happen at the federal level. So just be aware that these laws may not always protect your job or your identity. Lastly, we have the ombudsman. Now, the ombudsman is an official who hears complaints from employees and citizens concerning government administrators or policy administration. The ombudsman has the power to force administrative compliance, but um, they can bring complaints to the proper authorities. Most governmental organizations and agencies will have one person or a department designated as the ombudsman. So if you, an employee, or you, the public, have a complaint against an agency or department, you can bring that complaint to the ombudsman. The ombudsman then turns around and will file the complaints on your behalf with the proper authorities. This position was created by Governor Ann Richards. It is still in existence, and it is used, and there is ombudsman throughout state bureaucracy within the different departments and agencies. It is there to protect not just the consumer, but also the employees, so that people can make complaints against the various administrative agencies and departments. So once again, we come to the end of this topic. I hope that if you have any questions, you will reach out to me and let me know what your concerns are, or if you need clarification on anything that I have gone over. Please don't hesitate to email me. I look forward to our next subject matter, and I hope everyone is staying well.